here's a recap of the latest news from Ukraine. Russia's eastern offensive is underway with attacks along the whole 300-mile Donbass front. One city has already fallen to the onslaught, Kreminna, in the Luhansk region. Meanwhile, Russia's second deadline for Ukrainian soldiers in Mariupol to surrender has passed, with troops still holding out inside a giant steel works plant. Well, let's go back to that story. Of course, it's still dominating everything today. The massive Russian attack in the Donbass. President Biden calling his Western allies together for a video call in the last few hours. And without even knowing what was in that call, Russia said it needs to be prepared for possible aggressive action from NATO. Well, Arise US Correspondent Eric Ham is watching the story for us in Washington, and he joins me now. Lovely to see you, Eric. And as that Russian offensive in eastern Ukraine gets underway, President Biden has called his Western allies to the video phone. What do we know about what's on the agenda for that call?
Yeah, Charles, the White House has been pretty quiet about this virtual meeting that we know took place. And it's already occurred. In fact, it lasted just over an hour today. It took place in the Situation Room. It was scheduled to actually get underway at about 9:45 a.m. Washington time. It started a little after 10, and they finished around 11:20, 11:21 earlier this morning. And we do know there were a number of high-level officials that were on the call from different countries, allies who have been not only supporting the Ukrainians in their efforts to push back the Russians, but also watching the situation and also working very closely with other Western leaders and keeping their eyes on what's happening on the ground. We're still waiting for a readout in terms of what took place and what were the agenda items. A few things that we do know is that there is growing concern about Ukrainians' efforts to be able to maintain a level of engagement against Russia, particularly as Russia steps up its shelling efforts in the east. In addition to that, we know that Ukraine is running low on supplies, and there is growing concern that as a result of so much that the United States has already provided, can the United States continue to provide additional support? So perhaps one of the issues that was discussed today was making sure that other countries can also ramp up their level of productivity. We do know of that $800 million in military aid that the president announced last week. We know already 4 shipments made their way to Ukraine over the weekend, and another shipment was scheduled to actually get there yesterday. So the United States is not only getting the aid there in large quantities, but they're able to actually get it on the ground in rapid succession. The question is, can they keep it up?
That's very interesting, Eric. And of course, beyond the support that you're talking about, we're also hearing that the White House is suggesting that this meeting would also attempt to look for ways to hold Russia accountable as part of their coordination around the issue of Ukraine. And of course, the Russians, we know, are already saying they need to be prepared for possible aggressive action from NATO. I mean, is that the expectation in Washington, that Mr. Biden will likely call NATO to further action?
Well, we have not actually gotten any information about that. We do know, and we got this yesterday from the White House press briefing, that they are looking at additional sanctions to implement on Russia. And of course, there has been a growing chorus of lawmakers even within the president's own party, that believe that there needs to be some U.S. presence on the ground in Ukraine, not only diplomatic, but also militarily. In addition to that, we also know that right now, the United States, led by the State Department, is actually looking at labeling Russia a state sponsor of terror. Now, that is something that could take at least an additional few weeks for that to play out. And if it does happen, it will certainly cut Russia off from a number of entities to be able to actually access the global economy. And of course, we know that there are only 4 countries right now that the U.S. has labeled state sponsor of terror: Syria, North Korea, Cuba, and Iran. And so Russia would make the 5th country. So we do know that there are those areas that the United States is working on. As far as actual boots on the ground or NATO actually creating some level of engagement, that's something that we have just yet to hear or hear underscored from the White House at this moment.
I was just wondering, Eric, what's the sense that you get where you are in Washington about how Mr. Biden has handled this Ukrainian crisis so far? I mean, are the politicians divided on that?
Well, of course, there is the political divide, and we do know that there are those who use this as a political football to try to score points. But we have to keep in mind, this is an election year. Midterm elections are in November. So that is something that, of course, everyone is keeping an eye towards. But nevertheless, what we do see is that both Republicans and Democrats want to see the United States continue to provide both material and humanitarian aid to the Ukraine, and also now what we're seeing is, again, something that we had not seen before. Some members of Congress, particularly those closest to the president, suggesting that perhaps there needs to be more engagement, meaning more troops on the ground. The issue of going after Russia's bread and butter, which we know is oil and gas, that is something, too, that is still up in the air. We know that there is deep divide in Europe as to actually how or when that should be on the table. And so that's something that we have not seen being really bandied about, or when we speak to our sources, not only at the White House, but at the State Department, is that something that's going to be on the table right now? That seems to be a non-starter. And it seems as though the White House is actually okay to allow Europe to actually take the lead on that, as it appears as though, from what our sources are telling us, the White House is not pushing that.
Well, thanks for that, Eric. Let's turn to President Biden's mask mandate. A federal judge in Florida striking down that mandate for airplanes and other forms of public transit, calling it unlawful. I mean, how much of a setback is that for Mr. Biden?
It's a tremendous setback. In fact, today we already see a number of flights, airlines, airports have already eliminated the mask mandates, while it's certainly up to each individual to decide if they want to wear a mask. The fact that it has come off, and now there's growing concern that we could see another spike in cases as a result of this. Already, if you look at places like major cities like Philadelphia, they have already re-implemented the mask mandate there. And here in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., cases are already spiking as well. So the question is, can these numbers continue to remain down, or will we begin to see them grow? Right now, while deaths are actually down 21%, hospitalization rates are actually up 39%. So there's a bit of a trick bag right now that we're looking at, and there's growing concern that at least by the time we get to the summer or after the Memorial Day holiday, we could see those numbers increase.
And Eric, the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki calling that decision disappointing and saying that the Justice Department would make any determination about litigation following that order. Does that seem likely?
Yeah, in fact, yesterday this was something that, of course, it was the main topic at the White House press briefing, and because the ruling had come in so quickly, there still hadn't been a review or a statement that was put out by the White House. They were still reviewing it. However, based on what we heard from Jen Psaki yesterday, and given that the mandate was only extended for 2 weeks, at this point, it appears as though the White House may decide not to actually fight this ruling and just allow it to go through, given the politics of what we're seeing play out right now. And with the president's approval rating being what they are, this just may not be the fight that the White House wants to take on at this time.
Eric, much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed. Eric Ham, Arise US Correspondent, talking to me there from Washington.